there, Sean.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So we're going live right this minute.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. This is Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm going to be talking to Sean David Morton this evening. And Sean and I go back quite a ways, and we're going to be talking about his upcoming book, Sands of Time, the third book in the series. And let me just get you on the screen here, Sean. Okay, so there we go. All right, so at this moment, Sean, what I want to do is, obviously you have a well-known radio show on Revolution Radio, and you've been broadcasting there for a while. Let's talk about your background briefly, because most people know who you are, but just for those that don't. And right now we're broadcasting over live stream. And once we're done with the interview, it will be put onto YouTube. And so, there could be we have new people signing up all the time to my YouTube channel. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and give them an introduction for yourself. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Sean David Morton, PhD in clinical psychology, therapeutic counseling, etc., etc. Graduated from USC, University of Southern California, with degrees in Bachelor of Fine Arts, BFA, and political science with, you could call them minors, but semesters away from degrees in organic chemistry and astronomy. Graduated from USC. Grew up around astronauts. My dad was vice president of TRW for customer communications, so I grew up around the Apollo and Gemini and Mercury astronauts when I was younger. Graduated from USC, was involved in the video business, did rock music videos, etc., etc. Through the 80s, DJ'd in nightclubs, owned nightclubs in a big nightclub in Southern California called Vertigo. Was one of the owners of that. For years I was in film and entertainment. And 1990, I really got involved in the sort of alternative UFO phenomenon. Although, I was involved in it from when I was a kid, because the astronauts would literally come back from space and say things like, Gus Grissom was probably the most vocal of this, saying that they were just spam in a can, and that they were the front for a secret space program that was in the process of going on, that the military was spending 10 times as much as NASA was, and that while the things were going on at Cape Canaveral, that the real space program was going on at other places like Area 51 as an example. And so the background of all of this is that in 1990 we did it. Well, actually in 1989 we were doing investigations in the Dulce Archuleta Mesa in northern New Mexico, which is a top secret underground military facility that it turned out that we were also operating with a group of rather nasty extraterrestrials. But they were also doing genetic research as well. And a lot of things were going on that keyed on Dulce and a number of battles that actually two main battles that actually happened at the Dulce Mesa, which is in northern New Mexico, just south of the Colorado border. 1990, did a documentary called UFO Contactees. Traveled all around the world for many months, interviewing everybody, putting together about 600 hours worth of footage with scientists, contactees, abductees, researchers. Then was one of the original producers, which was created on a show that was created by Linda Moulton Howe called Sightings. That actually Sightings, oddly enough, then led to X-Files, which is kind of strange. And then years later, I was one of the original creative producers on a program called Strange Universe Tonight on United Paramount Network, and that ran for 3 years or so there. And then I worked for Hard Copy as a investigative journalist and reporter there, doing a number of different stories which made air on Paramount. Did a lot of research and consulting on unsolved mysteries. Worked for Geraldo on a program called Now Can Be Told. Teamed up with Bob Keviott, actually when we were at Unsolved Mysteries, because I turned Bob Keviott onto the alien autopsy footage, and which later then led to the alien interview footage. And so all the stuff leading up to the books that we're going to talk about tonight, I made a contact in 1992 with a man who I didn't really realize who he was, but he started coming to a couple of the expos that I was speaking at, and we began a long-time friendship, talking to him on the phone very, very often. And at the same time, when I was a guest on the Art Bell radio program on Coast to Coast AM, this was back when we had like 26.4 million listeners, and I was the #1 guest for about 17 years or so. This gentleman would actually call and feed me a lot of information about the secret space program and the extraterrestrial agenda and things that he believed were going on, which then led to a kind of mysterious thing happening. The last time I heard from him, he was actually on the platform at the Obama inauguration. And some months later, I got a call from some very scary attorneys in Century City, who then left me as part of this man. We'll call him Ted Humphrey. That's not his real name. Even if I told you his real name, you wouldn't know it anyway. And he's one of those people that was kind of removed from history and society and all that. But it turned out that he had, quote, moved on. That's all they would say, that he moved on. Not died, but moved on. And then they left me these books and these journals. And they said, you can do with these what you like. You just need to change a few of the names because of he still has a Russian wife that's alive and a couple of children. And so this is what became the best-selling 5-star rated series on Amazon called Sands of Time, book 1 and 2. Uh-oh.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Okay. All right, I just lost you. So it's so Sands of Time, Volume 1 and Volume 2 are out there, and they are a true story, a journal of a man in black, if you will, a man who rose to become one of the most powerful men on the planet with an organization that they called the Group. And the books take place from about 1955 until about 2006 or so, and they include conflicts with the all about the Dulce War, all about why the saucers were actually shipped into Area 51. Hello, okay, there we go. And now we're up to Book 3. Book 3 takes place between about 2004 and about 2006 or so, with most of this having to do with what they believe to be an invasion of the planet, with protecting the Earth from what they think is a massive extraterrestrial invasion that's coming in the early 2020s, between about 2021 and 2025. Strangely enough, I think, Kerry, I wasn't sure who it was. I'm not sure if it was. I saw an interview with a lady that you did, with a lady that you did, the Halls of not Linda Hayes.
You're talking about Anna Hayes, who is now called Ashiana Dean or
something else now. But yes, I saw an interview that you did with her that actually very much confirmed things that were in the book about this race that's kind of on its way here. But anyway, so I just became kind of an expert, kind of immersed in the secret government and this alternative reality that they've created with all of this hyper advanced technology that's just on the other side of a beaded curtain. That if we could just step through that curtain, there would so many amazing advancements for mankind, and technology would be released. But I think it just has to do with fear of losing control of the population and fear of losing control of certain economic choke points and controls. But it's been very interesting to see the panic in the kind of Illuminati guys, these fellows behind the scenes, as people have used information like this program and others to start breaking out of the box.
Okay, Sean, just to back up a little, because some people won't know about books 1 and 2.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is also have you talk a little bit more about the author, because are you saying his name is Ted Humphreys?
Yeah, it's Dr. Ted Humphreys. That's the name that I use in the book for him. But no,
okay, because you're using the name as if that's his name. Okay, so I just, for people that may not be up to speed with everything, I want to talk about what your relationship was with this Dr. Ted Humphreys, which is the name you gave him in the book, which is obviously not his real name. And you're saying he didn't die, because I thought that he did die. That was my understanding when you first came forward with this.
I don't know if he did. That's the challenge. When you're suddenly told, I kept saying, was there a funeral? Did he die? Is it? That's very a shame. And they just said, well, he's moved on. And I said, I don't understand what that means. But then when I actually began to read the manuscripts and I started to get a handle on these diaries, these journals, I began to realize that they were playing with the nature of time. That all of this had to do with how you move through and or possibly maybe alter the time stream, which is not as easy as people think. One of the big reasons why they were studying the ships they had 9 craft at Area 51 over at just one of the facilities, the S4 facility, which is the famous one that Bob Lazar worked at. You begin to realize that the reason they were studying the craft wasn't so much the propulsion systems, which were certainly interesting and certainly something that we've adopted for the next wave of these craft, like the things like the TR-3D Astra and the Viper class, and of course, the Viper class are the triangular ships that you see, and then we've got a destroyer class of ships as well that are about 1,600 feet long, and they look very much like the Star Destroyers in Star Wars, with the exception of the fact that they're not pointed at the front. They have kind of a blunt shovel nose on them. But as far as I know, as of the manuscripts of 2006 or so, we had 4 of these Vipers, and we had 3 ships in the fleet that were the I guess you'd call them the Constitution class from Star Trek, but the USS John Glenn, the USS Silent Shepherd, and the USS, the most powerful of the ships, being the USS Gus Grissom, that they call the Gloomy Gus, actually. So it's and the Viper class are the ones where they had 4 at the time. They probably have a lot more now, but they had 4 of these black triangular ships as well that were capable of extrasolar travel. And this is all the stuff that's out of Area 51, things that I witnessed actually with my own eyes, which was interesting to then see it actually in the manuscripts of the books. A lot of it, once again, had to do with the fact that the saucers could dilate time. So you could actually get in the saucer, and depending on which button you pushed, you could 22 hours would have passed outside and only seconds for you, or maybe an hour or 2 hours had passed for you, and then no time really passing at all for people outside the ship, which of course is all about relativity. If you're inside a ship and you're making a journey that for you is maybe 4 hours, apparently if you're at the edge of the solar system, if you're out by Pluto and you want to get back to Earth fairly quickly, on the external relative aspect of it, you can probably make the trip in about 90 minutes or so, but I would say anywhere between 6 and 8 hours would then pass for you inside the craft. It's all relative as far as time dimensions go. So anyway, it's fascinating because now there's so many things that have confirmed the books. There's witnesses that have come forward that you've had on your show that confirm the events in the books. We had there's one particular event in the book which I thought was interesting that we call the Nakamura incident. Bill Clinton had actually sent a kind of a spy or a mole, if you will, this guy that we call Nakamura in the book, and he had infiltrated Area 51, not realizing that he was being used as an agent for one of the villains in the book, this woman, Ann Corbett. And when they discovered that he was then funneling information back to the Clinton administration about what was going on there, Nakamura was taken out. He was either imprisoned or just taken out and made what they call a target of opportunity, which means you just let him run around and shoot at him until he's dead. And Bill Clinton actually mentioned this. Actually, Bill Clinton was at a climate summit, of all things. And twice he was actually he was on the Jimmy Kimmel show, where Jimmy Kimmel asked him about his involvement with Area 51. And he said that, which was correct, he said he didn't get involved with it until much later. He didn't start messing with Area 51 until about the same time. The same time he started messing with Area 51 was the same time that the Monica Lewinsky thing came out. And I'm not sure there's not maybe a connection between those two, but he actually then said that there weren't any saucers there, that there wasn't anything there. Of course, there wasn't by that time. But he also said that he sent a person in to Area 51, and then he made a face. It was very funny because he said, well, that didn't end well, and he kind of made this weird face. And that was confirmation of one of the incidents in the book of this guy Nakamura, who was actually sent to 5-1 to figure out what was going on. But the ultimate goal of all of this, Kerry, is that if you look at, and this is my theory from just knowing what they're capable of and looking at what's happening. On the one hand, you have this gang that they simply call the group, and the group was headed at one point by Dr. Ted Humphreys until he decided that it was time for him to sort of kind of bug out and go rogue and apparently fix a few things in the time stream. And as I said, this book 3 is a continuation. It takes place about 10 years after the events in the first 2 books, but there are other books ready to go. I mean, there's book 3 is just a continuation. There's probably book 4, 5, and 6 that are there's enough of the notes here to be able to do that. And I wrote book 3 in a third person aspect, different from the diaries, simply because there was other information that I was getting from other places that were then confirming what was going on with the story. So it allowed me to use the other material that came with the package of these journals was enough for me to be able to then integrate it, because this book also has very much to do with the Nazi bell, as they called it, or the Die Glock, and the experiments that the Germans were using at the very end of the war. And the true mystery of the 20th century, that I don't see why people keep missing it. The real mystery of the 20th century is, if you look at first Germany and the Weimar Republic, and then what happened with Hitler, and the development of science under Hitler when he took over as Chancellor of Germany in 32, 33, was that here you have people that are going from Sopwith camels and biplanes that are made of basically canvas and wire, spit and glue, if you will. And within less than 15 years, maybe 10 years or so, from about 1919 through the mid-30s, you're looking at people that had quite possibly that developed space travel. I mean, it's you've got engines and devices that come out of Germany that are just absolutely stunning. When we conquered Germany, we had to rewrite our technical manuals. We had to put 750,000 new words in our technical manuals for stuff that we didn't have words for. And if you look at everything that was invented by the Germans by 1945, they dragged us kicking and screaming really into the 20th century. And that's
that they were dealing with the race from Aldebaran, right? So are you going to, do you have any information about that in your book?
Sure, absolutely. Well, look, I was, so much of this I've been talking on the circuits and bringing light about a lot of this, but okay, so let's go back to where it is. Now, book 3 is not so much about this. Book 3 is about, it has to do with the, what's called the Isomer Protocol, which was a treaty, really, that was signed to isolate us to Earth. And that goes back to Eisenhower and the true story of Eisenhower's first meetings with with what they called, they didn't even say where they were from. It was the scientists that called them the Etherians. And they called them the Etherians simply because they were very tall. They were tall, very pale, almost chalk white Nordics. And they had a device on their belt that could twist and actually make them invisible, actually alter light around them. But that goes back to it. Your question was, I'm sorry, okay.
Well, I was talking about those from Aldebaran. There were Mark Richards, who I just went and visited again recently, said there were 2 craft that crashed in Germany in 1938 and 39. Did your witness talk about that at all?
Yeah, oh yeah. This is where Hans Kammler, Herr General Uber Grubenführer, Herr Dr. Hans Kammler got all of his power. Is that he found a crashed ship in the Black Forest that they took apart, and the heart of the ship, the star drive, if you will, was the device that they called the Die Glock. Now, I don't know about 2 craft actually crashing, but I think their experiments with the Die Glock, with the heart of the ship, was also what was responsible for ripping these holes in the time-space continuum, for the invasion of Earth, if you will, and which had to do with not only the Die Glock ripping these holes, and maybe I should start at the beginning, because you have to understand that there was like a fence around the Earth. There was like a protective field that kept whatever was evil in, and whoever their buddies were trying to help them out. I mean, this goes all the way back. If you want to trace it briefly, I'm not sure. We have how much time do we have? We're doing this for an hour, right?
Well, actually, it's as long as you want, within reason. So
beer all night. All right, and this will link in. I think. Let me try to tell the story a little more linearly. In my interpretation, then we'll link it into Maria Orsich and the connections with Aldebaran and how it all comes about. Let's just put it this way. So, you have an interesting apocryphal book in the Bible, which is called the Book of Enoch. And Enoch was only found, it was in a very, very old Bible, and scholars discovered it in 1777 in a Bible out of Ethiopia. Now, the Ethiopians had, not only did people believe that they had the Ark of the Covenant actually in Ethiopia, which, by the way, about 16 months ago was stolen. I don't know why anybody doesn't get into this, but it's the Ark of the Covenant from the place where it was in Ethiopia, where Graham Hancock claims it was founded, was stolen by a strike team. A strike team of 16 men went in, drugged everybody with drugged food, and stole this box. At the same time, another big mystery is now coming out of Mecca, where they're doing all this construction around Mecca, and a pair of plasma electric explosions killed about 4,000 people in Mecca, which they claimed was due to a stampede. Now, the Saudi Arabians are asking the Russians to take what they call the Ark of Gabriel and take this thing in Antarctica. And why this isn't bigger news is really
that's
strange.
Fascinating, yeah. So that wasn't really a stampede. It was something else completely.
No, it was a plasma charge explosion from this box that they found underneath Mecca somewhere, because they're doing all this construction around Mecca, of what they call the Ark of Gabriel. Now, if people remember that Muhammad supposedly went off to a cave and was transported to heaven by the angel Gabriel. And Gabriel is one who supposedly gave him not only the Quran when he was in heaven in paradise, but also gave him another book called The Alienation of the Rose, which is called the Book of Truth. The Book of Truth disappears about 1195 A.D., and that's when Islam sort of descends into barbarism and savagery. Anyway, going back. So, related to this story, the Book of Enoch is about a 75-page book that links a lot of the Bible together. The strange thing about the Judeo-Christian history is that we're the only religion or mythology, if you will, that doesn't have an age of the Titans. In other words, a war between the gods and the Titans. The Hindus have it, the Greeks have it, but suddenly it's missing out of the Judeo-Christian text. The reason for this is the Book of Enoch is then rather savagely not only edited out but banned. We find it in 1777, and now you have Noah's grandfather working with the 72 sons of God, led by the archangel Semyaze, no relation to the Semyaze, the Billy Meyer case, who then assists Enoch, who's also, many people believe, was also known as Thoth or Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, and they build all these pyramids all around the world. They start building all kinds of pyramids. The idea would be is that Enoch not only builds the Great Pyramid of Giza, but baffles the pyramids all across the world, because pyramids maybe stabilize landmass, and maybe the moon was actually moved in orbit, possibly parked there at some point. So, anyway, bottom line is the sons of God start having sex with the human females. They birth a race of titans, if you will, these huge, according to the Book of Enoch, 350-foot monsters, which then become the war of the gods versus the titans. Yahweh says, okay, well, I'm going to leave you on this planet, and I'm basically putting up a fence to keep you here and keep anybody else from helping you. And Enoch goes crazy and calls it the Lords of Darkness, and that he says they will vie with mankind down through time. And he gives this big prophecy called Enoch's Lament. Okay, bottom line here is that something occurs where there's a fence or something protective put up around the earth to keep the bad guys in and whoever else out. Okay, moving forward. We move forward now through various civilizations, and now you have a very mysterious group of women who come from Zagreb, and they come into Austria, and there's 5 of them, and they call themselves the Vrildamen. And these girls did not believe in cutting their hair. They had long hair all the way down to their ankles. They would many times do these salons or these seances in the nude, which of course was made it sort of powerful and kinky for the Germans. And Rudolf Hess, who happens to be Hitler's best friend, who supposedly is the one who actually wrote Mein Kampf, or actually was the secretary for Hitler, and they claim to have written Mein Kampf while they were in prison. Of course, there's a body of evidence that says that's not the case at all, that they actually wrote Mein Kampf on a typewriter in the private quarters of Baron Rothschild. But that's a whole other story. So Rudolf Hess starts going to these salons with this woman named Maria Orsic. Maria Orsic begins to channel an individual called Eckhart, who was one of the spiritual mentors of Hitler and Hess that had passed away. Hess also then invites another individual called a man by the name of Vanzi Battendorf, who was also head of the Thule Society. So, but he comes in, and now Maria Orsich now says, I must, the voice or spirit of Eckhart moves aside and says, I must move aside for a greater entity. And suddenly she starts speaking in this very deep, sonorous, low voice, and now she's channeling a group of beings called the Sumi, and which sounds a lot like a Jewish law firm, actually. But the Sumi are a race of beings that claim to have been on this planet back and forth for about 500 million years, and that they come from Aldebaran, which is in the constellation of the high Hades, and that they were, in fact, the founders of the Sumerian civilization, and that they were here, in essence, to help the Germans, because they were the most advanced scientists and they were the only ones who can understand the concepts, but to help the Germans achieve what they call the Raumflügen, which is space flight. So Vanzi Battendorf and Hess don't really believe that she's really doing this, so they bring some experts in, and Maria Orsich starts writing in Sumerian. And they bring some of the top scientists in, and she begins to give them plans for spacecraft, basically, for the Hanabu, 1, 2, and 3, for the Vril 1, 2, and 3, for these dreadnought class. These things are about 100 meters across, and this was all for them to supposedly go to Aldebaran, I guess, and they were the ones that were then feeding the Germans all of this technology, which the Germans began to develop. Now Hess,
is that just
Hess fights Hitler to the salons. Hitler then gets behind it, and then Hitler puts the entire might and wealth of the Third Reich behind actually developing this program. Go ahead.
Okay. Is this part in your book or in your third book? Because I don't think it's in your first 2 books, right?
No, not, because this goes with it's in book 3, and then we're going to talk about it in book 4, because this is. Okay. I don't want to spoil it, but well,
no, that's all good. I don't expect you to tell the whole story. At the end of the book,
let's just say that Dr. Humphreys takes a rather interesting leap into time. Let's just put it that way. So
okay, but he was also dealing in the first 2 books, as I recall, which I read as one book originally. He was dealing with time travel, and he was dealing with a certain, I believe it was a Nazi officer, was it, that was coming in and out of time and visiting him.
Right, Simon Ratterman and his accomplice.
So now you're saying that in the third book he actually starts time traveling himself.
Correct, because now around 2006 or so, we actually developed what they call the Time Runner technology. Remember, in the books, you have Ted's father, Ted Humphrey Sr., and Simon Ratterman and Ann Corbett, who are the 2 villains, if you will. But they were the ones that had perfected the ability to sort of dance through the raindrops, to actually then slide in and out of various phases of time. And that was the one thing that we were trying to figure. There's the accidental time travel accident that occurred at Montauk in May of 1961. And that was when somebody actually got sucked into the field and came out the other side. Well, when you travel through the time stream, you have to go through the astral plane. And when you go through the astral plane, there's all kinds of really horrible, icky stuff that actually lives in the astral plane. And so our guy came out the other side not very well. He was cold. He was shaking. He was kind of molecularly altered. He was covered with this ectoplasmic goo, and kind of the same things that happened. The other challenge was that the only other incident of mass time travel we have was the Philadelphia experiment, when the USS Eldridge in August of 1943 then moves 60 years through time, reappears for a brief moment in August of 2003, blacks out the entire east coast of the United States in this blink of an eye supercharge, reaches the end of its tether, and then moves backwards. Well, the men who survived that, the ones that weren't phased into the decks, had problems. I mean, there was challenges. There's a 0 time point in every human being, and if you want to travel interstellarly or within the galaxy, you have to face the challenge of time, because time where we are at the fourth arm of the Milky Way, all out in this kind of backwater ghetto, if you will, time is traveling differently, actually faster than time is traveling, let's say, if you're at the center of the Milky Way. If you're at the center of the galaxy, you just have to imagine in the center of the galaxy, the rotation of the whole galaxy is maybe like this. This is right dead center of the light year across black hole at the center of the Milky Way. Of course, if you take two tennis balls and put them in a bicycle wheel, you have one near the center and one at the outside, and spin it, obviously the one at the outside is moving faster than the one at the center. So you have to find a way to actually balance that out. But there's a zero time point at the center of the galaxy, and every human being has it, a zero time point. Every cell in your body has a zero time point. And this zero time point is like a hook upon which all the subtle bodies, because you not just have a physical body, but you also have, if you start way out here, you actually have, I guess what you would call, you have what you call the causal plane, where creation is actually happening. You have the causal plane, you have the etheric plane, you have the astral plane, then you have a mental plane, an emotional plane, and then a physical plane going out through the seven chakras. So each chakra has seven chakras. So you actually are dealing with a system of about 7 times 7 being 49. You're actually dealing with a system, a very complex system of chakras that when you jump into the time stream, gets all goofed up. I mean, the experiments in time travel that Dr. Fred Bell did, he discovered that when you actually jump into time, this is one of the interesting things that came from his time experiments. Fred built a time machine in his backyard that I helped him build when I was in college. And this thing was 4 stories high, and it was a big pyramid. It was a pyramid on the bottom, and it was like a dodecahedron where he would get in this thing. And if you jump at the vibratory frequency of time, if you and I were to jump seconds into the future, and we were still vibrating at the frequency of now that we're vibrating at, the future just looks like a purple holographic construct. It all looks like purple light that you could sort of see through, because creation didn't happen in the past moving forward. It's literally sort of happening all at once. We're interacting with the universe.
Yeah, all time is simultaneous.
It all creates itself, right? Exactly. So it's so Fred's experience was that you kind of get sucked into the time stream kind of inside out. That you actually, the causal plane gets sucked in first, and you come along with it. The challenge being is that with the Philadelphia experiment, these men, I mean, horrible things happened to them. They went into a weird field. Usually, when they were interacting with anything magnetic, one man was carrying a compass across a Navy yard, and suddenly started to. He went into this weird. They called it a time shift, where you could see the person kind of moving into it. It's like an X-Files sort of effect. They found at first that the other sailors could put their hands on him and bring him back into phase with reality. But then the real tragedy was one guy went out of phase. The other men put their hands on him and tried to stop him from going out of phase. And it became like people with an electrical current. Another person jumped in, another person jumped in, and then they're all trapped like that. And they burned like that for something like 18 days before they all disappeared. So, and also the Eldridge, along with the Die Glock that the Nazis were working with, ripped a gigantic hole in the space-time continuum in 20-year increments. And we discovered that the whole thing was a trick, that there was another group that was working with the Philadelphia experiment gang that they called the K group. And the K group, Carlos Martinez talks about this was it Carlos Allende? Talks about this in his notes. But the K group were this group that were insisting that the Philadelphia experiment be performed on a particular day, and that being, I think, August 13th of 1943, because that was a biorhythmic low point. That was the Earth has biorhythms like human beings. It was a spiritual, physical, emotional low point for humanity. And if you look at what was happening in 1943, I mean, the entire planet was at war, and you had tens of thousands of people dying every day. I mean, the entire planet had been engulfed in war. So going back to Maria Orsich and how all this other stuff happens, is Orsich then gives them all of this technology, which the Germans then begin to develop. And the Glock itself was the way the Germans actually did this was that they chained the Glock inside a circular concrete henge, if you will. And that was where the Glock itself.
Yeah, Bill and I went there.
Right, and then the way it worked was that they would actually the Hanabu craft or even the Vril were only capable of spaceflight for about 4 hours. So what they would do is they put these things on the top, and then they would just float over the henge itself. They would turn on the die Glock or the bell as it was called, and this thing would then create a vortex, which would then allow the ship.
Well, there were counter-rotating rings of energy.
Correct. Yes.
That
indeed.
created the vortex.
And that's what we were. That is what we were mimicking at Montauk. At Montauk, we had the two counter-spinning rings with a central one in the middle, and that was what allowed us to be able to teleport objects from place to place and teleport them through time and space.
But
the challenge was, how do you do it with human beings? How do you do it with human beings, something organic? And that's the one thing that we solved in 2006.
Okay, so you're saying in 2006, I'm not so sure that's accurate. So where are you getting that number? Well, simply because of my other witnesses. You understand that, from what I understand, Henry Deacon, for example, went to Mars and back and was working there, according to his claims, and was doing that way before 2006. So there's a certain amount of jumping, interdimensional time travel, etc., that has to go on if you follow the sort of trajectory of the secret space program. Mark Richards, again, being in prison, who was part of the Dulce raid, etc., he was also going interstellar, etc., etc., and so we're talking about two different levels, maybe, of timelines. And so the 2006 date, is this associated with your witness? And what does he say about it? What does he say was happening at that time?
Well, at that time, the reason we were forced into developing it is because, and again, I know this goes against a lot of your witnesses, and, I'm not telling you I know any
No,
of
it's
this
all good. Let's just hear what the different
again,
points of view are.
The things that I've seen have just been the things I've seen with my own eyes at places like Area 51.
Sure.
And of course, you and I both. I'm not any kind of E. I'm not a contactee or an abductee or any kind of E. You and I go out and interview a lot of people. I've had the honor and the pleasure of actually getting paid as an investigative reporter and as a journalist to go all around the world and talk to people that have had these experiences, and then have one of the guys one of the main guys in the secret government do this. I mean, I've heard about this stuff about Mars, about the jump rooms and all that. I've heard about the whole thing happening at 999 Pacific Coast Boulevard, which is at the kind of on the corner of Imperial Highway. And yet, I've talked to people who worked in that office building who said that they were there when people claimed that there were jump rooms on the roof, and that
that's Andy Bishago. That's another witness altogether. So, but to get back to the 2006 date and the witness that you have, I assume it's coming from this individual who you call Ted Humphreys. Is that date coming from him?
Yeah, because it's that in that period of time, he's purposely vague about a lot of the time frame of what's going on here. So as I said, the events in the third set of papers occur between about 2004 and 2006. The reason they were desperately trying to, once again, duplicate the time runner technology, because his father had managed to do it and figure it out, and then of course this Nazi scientist and his sort of female henchman had figured out how to actually run this. But the whole point of all of this is that, yes, we had access to Mars, but what's the best way for me to do this? All right, so let's go back to 1953. We'll go back to 1953, and in 1953, when Eisenhower disappears for a day, in I think February of 53, and the president just vanishes. He's on the golf course in Palm Springs having a nice day. He then gets taken out to Muroc Air Force Base, which is now Edwards Air Force Base, and has a meeting, and the meeting's backed up by guys like Gerald Light and Archbishop McIntyre of Los Angeles Archdiocese, and all these witnesses were there who saw what was going on with this race of beings that they called the Etherians. The beings themselves did say where they were from. There are some essential lies that have been released even in the story. That, first off, you have the story today that all they were talking about was, well, we're worried about you developing nuclear weapons. I tell you what, we'll try to make you a deal, and the deal is if you give up your nuclear weapons, we will give you technology and help you ascend the planet. And Eisenhower is the one, Eisenhower didn't really know who they are. Two, for all Eisenhower knew, because he had access to all of the German technology, these were Germans disguised as space aliens. Three, he knew if they didn't like us having atomic weapons, he knew that he wanted them, because remember he just fought a world war. But there was something else that was going on, and the other thing that was going on was what really triggered this meeting was the National Security Agency, or what was then kind of a version of the NSA or the Secret Space Program, had landed on the moon in 1953, and we were actively developing a lunar base from that period of time, and that's what they didn't like. And the lunar base we have up there, which is called it's called Cape Malabar Radio. I don't know why, but it's called Cape Malabar Radio, and it's up at the North Pole of the moon. And the reason it's on the North Pole is because there is ice on the moon, therefore it's a supply of water, and the fact because it's on the North Pole, you don't have a dark side, so that you're constantly in laser communication. There's a secondary communication system as well that we communicate with all of our, for lack of a better term, our Starfleet of stuff that's out there. It's extraterrestrial. It's exactly like Starfleet. It's all under the Navy. It's called the Nebraska Navy. It used to be out of Strategic Air Command in Omaha, and they moved everything. Most everything is at the new U.S. Space Command Center, which is in a top secret base under the Kings Peak in the Uinta National Forest in Utah. I don't know why everything's being moved to Utah, but it is. So the incident is that there was a starship that crashed on Mars, and it belonged to the Altarians. Altair is about 14.6 light years away. The Altarians are very tall. They're about 7 feet tall or so. They have kind of large, kind of pointed, swept ears. They have blonde hair, very crystal blue eyes, kind of orangish skin. And we were engaged in a few projects with the Altarians at that time. Now, when we denied the Etherians of their treaty and said thanks but no thanks, they said, well, you're going to be approached by another group, and this other group is not as benevolent as we are. And lo and behold, there was a contact with the Greys, supposedly somewhere around November of the same year of 53. We entered into a couple of treaties with the scum of the universe, and which led to a series of conflicts, a conflict in 1977, and then a final conflict with these beings somewhere around 85, 86 or so under the Reagan administration at Dulce. But then finally what happened is that after that, somewhere around the early 90s, there was another agreement that was signed called the Isomer Protocol. And the Isomer Protocol stood for the Isolation Memorandum. And what this was is that the Altarians were they were just like the cosmic police force that were enforcing it. And, I know you have other witnesses that will say that this is not true, but the Isomer Protocol basically was an agreement that they would not interfere with what was going on the planet, specifically allow the bad guys to stay in control, but that they gave us a limit, saying that we had basically, we were going to be isolated to about 350 miles above our atmosphere. We could have space stations, we could send drones, we could do any other kind of planetary exploration that we wanted, but that we were not to be allowed manned exploration of the solar system until we cleaned up our act. And if you look at it from a strictly extraterrestrial perspective, number one, humanity seems to be a virus because we don't make anything better. We basically just absorb and consume things until they're dead. Number two, our language is considered a disease in some parts of the galaxy. Number three, we've made really bad deals with some really scummy races out there that make the positive races far less likely to trust us. And what happened was that we scuttled and took an Altarian spacecraft that had actually crashed on Mars. Then what happened was that there were these spheres that had come out of the spacecraft, and we tried to crack one open, and it turns out the spheres were distress beacons. And when we cracked it open, it completely destroyed one of our facilities in Kansas, and called Gage Noble 7, and just wiped it out. But this distress call then went out to everywhere in the universe. I mean, everywhere, not just the galaxy, but everywhere in the universe, if you understand how subspace communication happens. And the Altarians came back to get their ship, and then realized that we'd been up there, that we'd taken it, and they were here to now enforce the Isomer Protocol, which means that they were going to come and basically destroy our bases on the moon and in the rest of the solar system. And we fought back. We showed them that we are not to be messed with anymore, and a lot of this had to do with the final development of the Time Runner device. But I don't want to tell you too much about the book because I want you guys to get it when it comes out. So, it is a nonstop sort of action adventure disclosure of the reality of what's really going on behind the scenes. And look, I've said this from the beginning of me getting involved with Area 51, which really started with our interview with Bob Lazar in 1990, and then my going out to Area 51 in 91, and then us getting swooped by a flying saucer, and then that my friend Shannon Sands putting that on the front page of the LA Times, which made Area 51 a big international deal. Everybody in Vegas knew about it. It was a local thing at that time. George Knapp and Bill Cooper and John Lear had made it a big sort of Las Vegas sort of thing. But my contribution to this was putting it on the front page of the Times and then making an international news story. But from my involvement in it, I've kept saying that the technology that's available at 51, the technology that's on the other side of the veil, the stuff that could really change the world, that could free all of humanity. And the great thing about it is that watching through your efforts and through the efforts of alternative media and through the efforts of the millions of people that are going to watch this at some point, we're pushing back that envelope. We're now pushing all the bad guys up against the wall for them to take some of these resources and put them towards the betterment of humanity. And I think when we reach a certain level, you'll probably have some of these extraterrestrial races maybe step in and do something positive. Now, go ahead.
Okay, well, that's actually a great sort of overview, I would say, of your book and the witness that you're dealing with. So, in terms of the amount of material you've got and the books that you say that you're going to be able to write from this point on, have you looked at all the material already? Do you already know where it's headed?
Sure. I mean, well, yeah, and that's the whole next. This book and the next one is what's going to deal with Hans Kammler, which Hans Kammler at one point had 14 million people enslaved under him. Look him up. I mean, Hans Kammler was the most powerful man outside of Germany. He was the Führer outside of Germany. Hitler had all the control inside Berlin, but Hans Kammler controlled the rest of it. Hans Kammler controlled, I think, 9 bases that were working on this flying saucer Vril Haunebu technology. Kammler, as I said, not only was working with the Bell, and I think there's a body of truth. There is a scene in the book where the Nazi Bell they're in a I forget the town, but it's this is like December of 1944. But the Bell escapes basically. It rips open the top of a mountain, rips a hole in the space-time continuum, and it is. I mean, I can confirm that the object that crashed in December of I don't have it in front of me and I'm tired. I think it was 1964. But this object that crashes in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, was the Nazi Bell from or the Die Glocke.
Yeah, well, this is what Clark McClellan talks a lot about.
There you go. Yes, and actually, having written all this, having known all this, it's interesting because looking at McClellan's material, he's absolutely right. It's and one of the survivors, Wolf Davis, I think is what his name is, Colonel Wolf Davis. He was one of the survivors from the Bell experiment where the Bell escaped and ripped the hole in the space-time continuum. And then he was there, actually in Kecksburg. He was actually brought by members of the group to say, "Is this the thing that you worked on?" So he was actually there in Kecksburg with knowledge. He was brought to the United States under the whole Nazi rat line and the Project Paperclip thing. But he was one of the people who was actually working on the Bell at the time. And
right, fascinating.
They called them the time waves. The time waves that came off the Bell, this is kind of interesting. They called them solutons, is what it was. Solutons, which was this purple radiation that was killing everybody. That's why Kammler would take all these Jews who were sort of in a pen, and he would just kind of throw Jews at the Bell, and this purple radiation would just dissolve them. I mean, they would just go, turn into Sandmen, if you will. And that was what they think happened. The very last flight to Aldebaran. When the ship came back, everybody on board was dead. It was a ghost ship. It was it looked as though the ship had aged 100 years, even though it only been gone about a week or so. And everybody on board was dead, looking like they'd all aged 100 years or so and all died. And that was when they kind of abandoned the whole program. Maria Orsich completely disappears in March of 1945, saying that everybody just went home. And nobody ever found Hans Kammler. Nobody ever found Maria Orsich. Nobody ever found what happened to the Vril Damen or the 5 girls that were part of that whole group. She claims, quote, "We all went home to Aldebaran." and she was never seen again. So never tracked, never seen. And Kamler disappeared. Now you discover that Kamler winds up in this kind of co-owned Russian-American prison called Mount Grace, which is a kind of a volcanic island up in off the coast of Iceland, which is where we then learn a lot of stuff. And they sent Ted Humphreys into this to crack what Kamler knows about these equations for, once again, time travel, to be able to go through time.
But there's I have one witness that talked to me about actually the Nazis had discovered time travel and that they were actually reverse aging as well. So do you have
that goes back to you were talking about Al Bielek and those gangs. Al Bielek talked about them having
this witness isn't associated with them actually.
Okay. Well, I'm just telling you that Al Bielek told me this stuff in the 80s. I mean, Al Bielek was the one that said, he was the one that gave the date of, telling me that something was going to happen. I mean, I wrote a whole article about this in February of 2003, saying if you look what's going to happen in August, that if these guys are telling the truth, if Al Bielek and these guys are correct, there's going to be a massive electromagnetic anomaly of some kind that's going to have some kind of effect on the East Coast. That's going to be on this date of August 13th of 2003. Now, strangely enough, I think it was August 14th actually was the day that this happened. But Edison on the East Coast said that something occurred in the blink of an eye that blacked out the East Coast. And some parts of the East Coast didn't even have power for 28 days. It blacked out New York City for 3 days. And this is something that we predicted. This is something we said, look, the Eldridge is going to appear here, and it's going to go bam, and it's going to reach the end of its tether and then go back to the beginning of time, which completely validates a lot of the stuff that Preston Nichols and Al Bielek were saying. Now, Bielek was the one that was talking about how they had a device that could actually rewind the DNA. Of interest, the book says that Nikolai Tesla was taken into these top secret programs, and then a doppelganger of Tesla was actually sort of released into the wild, if you will, and that doppelganger was the one that actually died at the New Yorker Hotel in January of 1943. But I spoke to people who claimed to have spoken to Tesla well into the early 1960s, where he would have been 100 and he was 83, 20, maybe 40, 45, 55, 65. Yeah, about 100 something, 120 or so. So, but Tesla was just considered too dangerous to just be left kind of laying around. So, the man that died at the New York Hotel was not Nikolai Tesla. It was a doppelganger of some kind. Tesla supposedly quit the Philadelphia experiment, claiming that they didn't know what they were doing. Einstein quit as well, supposedly. But because these were the really smart guys. These are the John Van Neumann and Vannevar Bush. I mean, Van Neumann went on to actually found Raytheon, and Raytheon is the parent company of Dish Network, and all the satellite stuff that you're looking at now is because of this core group of scientists who made the Manhattan Project guys look like dunces riding the short bus with helmets on all day. So it's if you look at the progression of who the scientists were and where they were going. I mean, Al Bielek, for his wildest story, he had the wildest story on four wheels. And yet everything I was able to check of what he said, times, dates, places, scientists working on different projects, all turned out to be true. And, I helped support Al until the end of his life. I mean, I was helping pay his rent. And, he died down in Florida, rather, well, not tragically. He was just very, very old and kind of beaten up. But, I can't say anything about other witnesses, Kerry. You have a body of information and you have a whole,
I don't expect you to. I'm only interested in your witnesses at this moment. This is all about your witnesses and the information you're getting. So, it's perfectly valid.
Everything that he was talking about as far as Area 51 was, and this is what's strange because I knew a lot of people would probably know the name of Phil Schneider, and I knew Phil Schneider. I spoke at a couple of conferences or expos with him. I think Phil was murdered in '96, I think it was. But I went back and looked at a lot of the Phil Schneider stuff. This is after I wrote the books and sort of molded the journals into something. And it was very interesting because Phil Schneider was one of the mole men that was actually underground that was drilling the tunnels for the Red and Blue Line railway system that then interconnected Dulce with all the other top secret facilities. So I realized that there's an incident in the book where when Schneider hit this one particular area underneath Dulce, that my guy, Ted Humphrey, as head of the group, gets the call to go down and actually explore what was going on down there. And that was when we actually then found, this was the impetus for the Dulce War. Turns out that they were not doing genetic experiments. we found an abattoir of tens of thousands of human skeletons, skeletons without the heads, actually. And this was all this massive graveyard. And we began to realize that the ETs that we were dealing with at Dulce that were down beneath level 4 were certainly up to no good, and were responsible for the deaths of, as I said, tens of thousands of people, boiling people down for what appeared to be food as a storehouse for a future ET invasion of some kind. And all this evidence was then presented to Reagan. Reagan was one of the only ones that was ever, I would say George Bush Sr. probably knows everything. He's the one. He was at a conference, interesting enough. George Bush Sr. was at a conference, and somebody said, do you think there will ever be exposure about UFOs? And he got this weird look in his eyes, and he actually stood up and said, I can tell you the truth, but you can't handle the truth. So they had to stop the whole conference, because it looked as though Bush Sr., because he's 93, and he just wrote this kind of tell-all book about how terrible Rumsfeld was, and how they took advantage of his son and all this. So there's a lot of people out there that think that that George Bush Sr. might just pop and start talking about all this stuff, sort of like Paul Hellyer did, the defense minister of Canada, who said, yeah, we're in contact with 4 or 5 extraterrestrial races, and they've been around for a long time. And the Russians, Medvedev has also talked about this, claiming that Medvedev came in like that close to actually admitting that the group exists. He said that the movie, jokingly, he said the movie Men in Black was basically a documentary. This is the former prime minister and president of Russia saying this. So, the Russians have always been far more forthcoming with a lot of this information than anybody else.
Okay, what about... Okay, well, wait one second. What about, in your book, the first and second book, you have a guy who runs, he's like an elite ET, and
yes.
I don't think you actually say, I'm not sure if you say what race he came from. Do you recall?
Again, that's the beauty of these things. Everything's not completely explained. What happened is that there's a character named Lord Tugi, who is a blonde Nordic, and his planet was subjugated by the Greys, or the reptilians, if you will. And what was happening was that he was kind of a hostage, sort of a prince on his own world, if you will, and he was the one that was the human interface of the Greys at Dulce, and he was the one that then interacted with the various human scientists at the base and at the facility.
But he claimed to become, he had a very arrogant attitude, and he also said that he was from a certain so-called royalty, a royal line.
I think it was, but it's the royal race of Adacta. Again,
do you think was that literally from the Humphreys material?
Yes, no, absolutely it was. It's not stuff that I would know. So
I'm just curious if the actual name of the race was, accurate as he wrote it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, he said he came from the royal races. It's it's someplace I've never heard of, but it was the royal races of Edacta, that they had to then interbreed with human beings because they needed. We're a very valuable genetic storehouse of flora and fauna, if you will. We're this massive library of very, very interesting things. I mean, if you just consider for a moment in all this, if you grew up on a planet where you had one race on the planet, as an example, grew up on a planet where there wasn't any war, wasn't any hunger, wasn't any of the trials and tribulations that we have here on Earth, we're amazingly interesting. We're this stopping off point for multiple races. I mean, you can basically, I think the evidence points to, you could probably say that the Caucasoid races come from the Pleiades, and the only history we have on that is from people like Billy Meyer, who claims the Pleiadians all came from the constellation of Lyra, and that they were a race of sort of blonde Nordics that were storming across the galaxy. So, and that Earth, the reason we're called Terra is because we're the twin of Era, which was the planet of the Pleiadians that was in the Alcyone? The Alcyone star system. This is according to Billy Meyer case notes. But the Caucasoid races come from the Pleiades. The black races come from Sirius A. The copper or red races, which of course the Egyptian royalty and probably the Atlanteans, and then they were probably the direct descendants to them would be probably the Native American or North American Indians, are all copper or red-skinned, and they come from Sirius B. We have the Dogon tribe, which is the progenitors really of the Negro races in Africa, that all worship Sirius and knew that it was a binary star thousands of years before we did, knew that the two binary stars rotate on a 33.3 cycle, which is another reason why 33 is so weird, and why a record rotates at 33 and a third, and all that stuff. That the Asiatic races, probably the Chinese mostly, came from Epsilon Eridani. That's an Eric von Daniken theory, where Epsilon Eridani exploded or went supernova about 100,000 years ago, and that the Asian races actually traveled here inside the moon as a space arc, if you will, and the moon was parked in orbit and then abandoned. And then the Japanese are a separate racial strain altogether, and they came from a system. Once again, this is Billy Meyer material. Came from a system called Nissan, which is funny because they have a car company named Nissan, and that the Japanese kind of warred with the Pleiadians across the galaxy. But so there you go. There's the basic rundown of the mythology of where everybody comes from. Oh, there's one other aspect of this is you have a gang called the Arcturians. And the Arcturians are really interesting because the Arcturians are the ones that are making the crop circles. And the Arcturians are like 10th dimensional corporate energy beings. And the ships that you see making the crop circles look like, well, they call them amber gamblers in England, and they just look like little yellow footballs. But supposedly inside the ships are, I guess you'd call it like TARDIS technology, time and relative distance in space. And inside the ships are supposedly miles across. And according to one of the contactees that I was friends with, this guy Adrienne, who was also known as the Miami contactee, who took some of the best pictures and best video and best photos, and we could never get him to come forward, and we could never get him to give us the rights to anything. And but he says that the Arcturians were, when you see them in person, they're in these huge robotic bodies that look very much like the robot from Gort from Day the Earth Stood Still, because they exist. There's like millions of them inside these forms. So, but the Arcturians are the ones who are supposedly taking over the police duties of planet Earth. So, and they're the ones that are supposed to be protecting us. And there's some people that believe that the reptilian influences have already been kicked off this planet, and now we're just kind of dealing with the aftermath. But in regards to the book, Sands of Time, Volumes 1 and Volumes 2, like I said, we got a 5-star rating on Amazon. We've got, oh my goodness, we got hundreds of reviews that just say the books have just changed people's lives and changed the way they look at what's going on. Let me just focus and conclude here. I think that what you have a super technology group of people on this planet that are using technology that is probably maybe 50 years ahead of anything that we've seen. I mean, if you look at corporate technology is maybe 3 to 5 years ahead. Military technology is about 15 years ahead. But then there seems to be technology beyond that, again, for all intents and purposes, looks like extraterrestrials. It could indeed be us, but that we've never lost a technological advancement since Da Vinci or the 15th century. If we continued forward with the technology from the 15th century, without all the wars and the Crusades and everything else, I mean, the Arabs probably would have put somebody on the moon by the middle of the 1800s, by 1850 or so. If you look at Jules Verne, who was a Fabian socialist, or H.G. Wells, who's a Fabian socialist, or George Orwell, Eric Blair, Fabian socialist. All of them have given visions of the future that may come from this inner core of Illuminatus, if you will, that are showing us the future in popular fiction. And they're doing 3 things. Number 1, they're keeping the planet from tipping over. They're constantly doing they're causing earthquakes. They're basically triggering earthquakes so that the nodal axis of the Earth will actually come into alignment with the center of the galaxy. There's another big blip of another alignment with galactic center, by the way, that's going to happen at the same time we have a solar eclipse cutting across the center part of the United States in 2017, in August of 2017. But they're doing a series and number 1, they're fixing the Earth, and they're triggering a series of controlled earthquakes to actually even out the Earth. Number 2, there's something wrong with the sun, and they've been working on altering the sun, and this includes creating very minor black holes, artificial black holes that last anywhere between about 9 and 15 minutes or so to pull energy out the sun. And number 3, they are building a gigantic planetary defense grid that looks to be to protect us either against ET interference, like the Altarians. We went toe-to-toe with the Altarians in 2006, basically saying, get off our backs, we're going to explore the solar system. You're not going to contain us anymore. But once again, there seems to be something very big and very bad on its way here. And as of 2012, there's like a gate for a tube or a tunnel that's open to allow them it like opens a highway that allows them to get here. That's why it was so fascinating to see your interview with Anna Hayes, because Anna Hayes described exactly this locked gate that opened in 2012, kind of to the center of the galaxy, of which she actually then intimated that whatever this race is, the Animos, if you will, that seems to be coming from what they call Galaxy M51. But
well, that's the Wingmaker material, but yeah.
That well goes back to that as well, but it's but again,
yeah, she's talking about the halls of the Mente, stargates that open in inner Earth that lead to actually ascension for certain people on the planet, as well as the planet herself going through in a sort of an ascension process. But whether or not that's actually going to succeed or not is a question. The so-called balancing of the Earth. Well, that depends who you talk to, and obviously you're talking to a certain group. And I just did an interview today during the day with Cameron Faley, who is a Kurdish guy who is worked very closely with the Illuminati in the City of London financial area, and is, I guess you might say, sort of a computer whiz as well as an Islamic scholar, religious scholar on not just Islam, and other religious disciplines as well, and has studied astrophysics in university in London or in England. He's talking about a planet X that he believes is on the way here, that his information is a composite of stuff he's getting, people coming to him from insiders, as well as what he thinks are his own sources, what you might call channeled or contact information, etc. So his dates, just for the sake of it, and because I'm curious whether your witnesses, especially this Humphreys guy, talks at all about a planet X or an incoming body, like a Nibiru type of body.
I should probably just send you the what was it? The Alma. This was just published. It's just published 4 days ago in one of the astronomical journals, where they've now used the the Alma telescope. Hold on, actually, let me find it for you, and I can actually get it to your people. Stand by 1 second. If I find this here, let me see. It's
okay. Is that a yes that your Humphreys talks about a planet
there's
X?
Just things
no?
There's just things that aren't mentioned. It's as I said, they're talking about how these beings are, as I said, on there. Something very big and very bad is supposed to be on its way here. So and that's once again, that's what's shared in the Wingmaker material. That's what's shared in the.
So you're saying Humphreys claimed that. He claimed that, but he didn't claim any kind of planetoid.
No, but here's what's happened: is that okay? So let me see if I can find this for you. There has just been announced, and this is in the Astronomical Journal, using something they call the Alma telescope, and I will find the actual document for you that actually now proves that there are 2 planetoid-sized objects, planet-sized. I mean, at the other side, out about 4,000 astronomical units, or AUs. An astronomical unit is the approximate distance of the Earth to the Sun. So, to give you an idea, Neptune is at about 2,500 astronomical units, and this object, or a pair of planetoid-sized objects, are now proven by science. And once again, I am not a Planet X believer. I debated Mark Hazelwood at the UFO World Congress back in 2003. I think Nancy Lieder is kind of full of it. And as you know, she's the one that's from Zeta Talk that started this whole thing. Even Zachariah Sitchin, by the way, who I knew very well. Zachariah Sitchin was the one that said, look, the 12th planet, because he's the one that wrote the book on the 12th planet. He said the 12th planet probably won't come around, even if it's there, won't be here until about the 29th century or so.
That's right. We have a few witnesses with different stories. The reason I'm asking you is simply to find out whether or not there's any talk about also what Clark McClellan talks about, which is a Dyson sphere that is probably surrounding a brown dwarf. Have you heard anything about that?
No, but
okay.
You might want to. I mean, that's in essence what the moon is. The moon is, the moon is a Dyson sphere. The moon is we discovered with Apollo 13 when the retro rocket crashed.
The moon isn't on the way in here. It's already here. So we're talking about another body that Mark Richards also mentions this, but it is not Planet X and it is not Nibiru. So there is some confusion out there. There's no doubt different stories coming out. The ALMA material, go ahead and send it to me. That's fine. I was just curious. I'm also curious whether or not Humphreys names names at all. Does he talk? Does he release information that is more or less secret, or is he very careful in that regard?
No, everything theoretically everything at Area 51 is classified. Everything at okay, here it is. Hold on. 1 second. Everything at Area 51, everything about Dulce, everything about, all this stuff is all classified stuff. Let me see if I have this document for you. I just download it here. Okay. All right, yeah, I'll get it out to you, and you can get it out to your people, because this is the theorem, and again, not a big believer of the Planet X theory. Once again, because astronomy, having taken so much astronomy in college, and understanding and working at Griffith Observatory, and obviously astronomers are completely anti most of the stuff that we're talking about. But there's probably a reason why...
I'm personally not a great believer in Planet X either.
He Plutoed Pluto as a planet because the perturbations of Pluto were proving that there was something else on the other side. There was just something else on the other side of the planet. Here it is. Okay, so I will send this to you, and ARVX. If you take a look at this and put this out to your people, this is from Astronomy. If you want the actual science on this, Astronomy and Astrophysics manuscript, the serendipitous discovery of a possible new solar system object with...
Yeah, I think I've already seen this article, so it's all fine, but I'm interested in your information right now, Sean.
No, okay.
You're on my show. I want to hear from you.
Does not have a 12th planet.
That's fine. Absolutely fine. I'm not trying to make an argument for yes or no. I'm just collecting data, so that I'm interested in hearing what your witness is saying one way or the other. So there's no mention whatsoever. What about Earth changes coming in the future? Anything about that?
Well, I would say, and this is my opinion.
Some people believe there's going to be, for example, another ice age type of thing. What about that? Anything about that?
That is quite possibly that. Yes, the planet it's not getting warmer; it's getting colder, and you have a major readjustment of what's going on. I mean, this gets into my information from, what I've seen from my remote viewing of the future as far as the Ted Humphrey information goes. No, it doesn't. It doesn't talk about future stuff particularly. It does talk. What I can tell you is that there's going to be the earthquake that they're talking about happening, and this is what maybe this is the timeline that they're altering. You have a fissure, if you will, a river of fire in the prophetic geometry of the Great Pyramid of Giza that says that at some point between now and 2020, and we don't know exactly when it is, but some point between now and 2020, there is going to be a massive, it's called the River of Fire. So we're talking about either a solar flare kill shot or a massive earthquake of some kind. My bet would be that in August of 2017, you have a total solar eclipse going across the middle of the country. And just like you had the eclipse that actually went across Mount Shasta, it started in Japan, went across Mount Shasta, aligned there. We had a big gang of people there that kind of celebrated it, and then kind of peters out over the Four Corners area of Texas. You have this eclipse is going to be happening with the penumbra of the eclipse dead center over the New Madrid Fault in the center part of the United States. At that same time that that's happening, we're going through another galactic alignment. And in these periods of galactic alignment, the Earth has a tendency to shift its poles. Not radically, mind you. For example, there was a shift in the poles, as Edgar Cayce predicted in 1998, 1999, but it was only a shift of about 5 degrees. You had a shift to the poles during the Fukushima earthquake, where the planet actually adjusted by almost 6.5 inches. You had another shifting of the poles, the Bio earthquake. You had so each time this is happening, by increments and inches, the planet is starting to align itself with galactic center. Now, if the New Madrid Fault blows in the middle of the country, then you're talking about a massive destruction that would be unimaginable. You're talking about now the Mississippi River being 100 miles wide. Now you're talking Edgar Cayce prophecies as far as the worst case scenario goes. And what I'm telling you is that I think beginning with the Northridge quake, beginning kind of with the Landers quake, whatever happened with the Landers quake back in 1992, it was June 28th of 92, altered the timeline. And the timeline was California being destroyed, Colorado being a seaport, the whole Gordon Michael Scallion, Dolores Cannon nonsense that I kept saying to everybody after 92 was now wrong, that the future had been shifted or changed. Because I was working with an earthquake group at the time. We were making the news every week predicting where these quakes were happening. And after 92, something happened to actually alter the timeline that stopped all of these big quakes from occurring. And I'm telling you that the people with the super technology are, and I know you and I have had discussions about this, but they seem to actually be, altering the timeline in such a way where each one of these controlled earthquakes, and I could show you the mathematics of it. The quakes themselves are all based on a pi-r squared. Each one of these quakes, starting with for example, the Fiji earthquake. Then you have the Chile earthquake, which was the 8.8. That happens 188 days beyond the Fiji earthquake. Then 188 days later, you then have the Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand. 188 days later, you then have Fukushima. 188 days later, you then have a 7.4 and a 7.5 that happened in Mexico. Everybody thought that they were going to happen in the United States, in San Francisco or Los Angeles, and of course the United States doesn't play fair, so we had them happen down in Mexico. This is all based on pi-r squared. If you take pi-r squared times by 60, you come up with 188.88888, and these guys at Cornell University discovered that these earthquakes are happening on this very specific mathematical pattern. There's a paper they wrote in 2011. Just noticing this pattern of all these major earthquakes occurring ever since the first New Madrid quake back in 1812 and 1813. So if you're looking at the destruction of it all, again, they're altering the sun, they're fixing the planet. Now we're looking at social destruction. Now we're looking at whether or not the country can survive another year of this president and whoever is coming after him. But there are forces behind the scenes that just make sure that nothing goes crazy, make sure that nothing gets too radically out of hand. So to answer your question, what I saw back in 1994, talking about when I predicted that Islamic forces would be behind aeronautic attacks on New York and Washington D.C., that then we would go to war with Islam, and the Islamic wars in the Middle East would bankrupt the country by about 2010. All of this happened. I mean, this is in print from 94. After that, we would then go toe-to-toe after we sort of wipe out the Muslim aspect of it. And I still also think that you have a prophetic prophecy that's about to occur with Germany and Russia, or Gog and Magog, invading the Middle East. And if that happens, then you've got the Ezekiel 38-39 scenario, which ends with the forces of Germany and Russia being wiped out by a massive earthquake on its way into Israel, because everything is lining up for that piece of prophetic prophecy, biblical stuff, to actually happen.
Well, this is something that Cameron Faley would probably agree with you on, because he's a Shiite, on the Shiite side of things, and that's what they look at as well. All right, well, thank you, Sean. I mean, that's great stuff. I know that people are going to be very interested in getting your third edition of the book.
Thank you. And that's coming in weeks. Let me get one more plug here.
Sure.
The other book that I wrote back in 2009 was called The Dark Prophet: Veil of the Antichrist, and it was a I have a character that I created called Father Dominic Lindquist, and this character works as a Jesuit spy, if you will, for the Vatican inside the Arab terror networks, if you will. And Veil of the Antichrist, which I wrote in 2000, which I wrote in 2009, predicted everything that's going on in the Middle East, predicted the Arab Spring, predicted the breakdown of all these governments, predicted this mass chaos starting in Tunisia, moving to Libya, moving into Egypt. But the point of the book is that now you're having the rise of what's called the 12th Imam, which is the Muslim Messiah, or the great Mahdi, the veiled prophet, the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, whatever. And I show specifically, if you guys, it's a fantastic book, got another 5-star rating on Amazon. But the book itself predicts everything that happens, but now has this man rising from the Middle East. And the whole point of it was an invasion of Europe through immigration. And all of them, this Imam, the Mahdi, the veiled prophet, as he's called, then moves his group so that he can preach in Cordoba, Spain, because Cordoba, Spain was the seat of the Muslim Caliphate, and it was only through the war with France and Charles the Hammer Martel that managed to drive the Muslims out of Europe. So this war that's happening with Islam is it's been going on since the 7th century. And so we're engaged with Christianity, the cross versus the crescent, whereas we're fighting the other war, which is basically the British and the Spanish, which is everything that's going on with Mexico. So these are sort of racial, religious wars and conflicts that have been going on for hundreds of years. So anyway, my book, The Dark Prophet, if you want to know about the rise of the next great Antichrist, if you want to know who's behind it, if you want to know all the breakdown of how it, and all the Islamic stuff that goes along with it, anyway, get Dark Prophet, because those are my Black Seraph, Dark Prophet, Sands of Time Volume 1, Volume 2, and then Sands of Time Volume 3 is coming. So
excellent.
Stand by. We should have it by the end of the month.
Okay.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you for your time.
Sure, absolutely, and that's why we had you on the show. So, Sean, there are a couple questions I think in the chat. Do you want to answer those questions? Yeah. Just
I was wondering if anybody was paying attention.
Yeah. Let's see. Someone wants to know about a report recently about a large planet found by the university. I think that's been answered. This is the
Well, here, let me send you I'm going to send you the link here.
Well, why don't you just you know how to share your screen? You can also show everyone.
Well, no, I don't know that.
Well, never mind. Don't worry about it then.
I just put it in.
All right. And, well, I'll get it at a certain point.
Look, this is actual science talking about.
Do you know how to
actual science now telling us that the observations cannot rule out a gravitationally unbound large solar system object within 4,000 AU. That's about twice the orbit of Neptune. The detection at only 2 of the 3 epochs and the flux would be consistent with Neptune. Assuming it is gravitationally bound, the most likely explanation is that what they're calling GNA, or GNA, belongs to a small group of large retrograde centaurs, or trans-Neptunian objects, and in that case, GNA is currently at, now they're saying that GNA is currently at 25 AU and has a size between, it's about 880 kilometers. So this is the scientific report that actually comes from...
Right, but it's actually a lot further out at this time than what is being predicted. Some people believe that Planet X is in our solar system at this time. This GNA is not. I read that article as well, and that GNA planet is not in our solar system.
No, it's out. It's outside. It's in the Kuiper Belt.
So we're talking about. Look, I have one of my witnesses talks about a number of planetoids, and some are in essence Dyson spheres, and they're driven. Okay. And some are manned by artificial intelligence.
Where are the gravitational effects of these? If we had a planet the size of what they're talking about...
Actually, I think that a Dyson sphere wouldn't necessarily operate the same way as a planet in terms of gravity.
Well, it could if it generates its own gravity. Yes, that's
it's possible. We're talking about a different kind of animal. Look, I'm not arguing for or against. I'm aware of the GNA article already. So, and I, it's great if you want to send me the link to the one you've got. That's fine. I'll put it out on my site.
So what was the question again for the people?
Well, I think that you've answered it. Was my point. Okay,
Okay, so again, look, astronomy is the most, I don't want to sound like Neil deGrasse Tyson here, but astronomy is the most populist of the sciences. A 14-year-old boy discovered comet Hyakutake. Amateurs discovered the Hale-Bopp comet. Some of the greatest phenomena we've ever had have all been discovered by amateurs. And I've been dealing with these Planet X people. These Planet X people, for example, put a photo of Io up, claiming that Io was Planet X, and they got caught doing it. It's just I've been talking about these people. They've been talking about gloom and doom and being Chicken Little and the sky is falling since 2003. And every single time they make a prediction, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Or they point
totally.
to the sky where nothing is. And
Right.
if we had a planet that was that big, it would be disrupting the gravitational fields. Remember, gravity happens almost instantaneously. If Mars were to just disappear tomorrow, we'd feel it like that. Speed of gravity is almost instantaneous. It's much faster than the speed of light.
Well, let me say, though, that it's also true that they don't even know what gravity is, that scientists actually cannot define gravity.
Of course not, but we know what it does, and that's Newtonian physics.
Well, we think we know what it does, but maybe there's some contradiction there as well. Because some people say that the planets themselves are conscious beings, which they are, and so, when you get into that scenario, then you're also talking about manipulation of the worlds around us in ways that are more sort of directed than left to chance or left to so-called gravity, which is kind of a catch-all for many things at this point, as far as I can tell.
Okay.
I was wondering if you would answer a couple other questions here. They're really wide-ranging questions, okay, all over the map.
Okay.
Someone else wants to know if John Titor has anything to do with Ted Humphreys.
No. The Titor case is interesting. It would make a really interesting movie. I read all the Titor material. It seems that the time device that he's talking about is legitimate. I think. I mean, there were diagrams. There was, I think it was General Dynamics. I think was the company, General Dynamics, and then General Electric. I think underneath that, the time device he used is completely plausible. What nobody researched about the Titor material that I thought was just kind of dumb that they didn't look into it is that he came back in time, supposedly to 74, I think it was 74 or 78, to get a particular computer, and it was like a Selectric. It was some kind of IBM computer, but nobody actually looked into whether or not the computer, the whole MacGuffin of the story, is him coming back to get this computer, which he then had to take back to the future to then reset everything, because we base everything, I completely agree with him, we base everything on Microsoft stuff. Microsoft takes over the world, and then in 2034, this is why this makes a great movie, 2034, just all the lights go out. Everything is based on this, because DOS, when Gates first put it together, is an outhouse. I mean, it's just a complete crap hole of the software that everything is based on, which is, of course, why, well, in my opinion, Apple computers are better. But but now it's all kind of lumped together. Nobody really researched whether or not that computer is the basis of all the different computer programs that he talked about. Number one. Number two, the future material of him predicting the timeline was complete crap. He didn't predict really a single major thing. I think he predicted that a hurricane would hit a certain area, I think, and go through the Republican areas of Florida or something. But I think he explained this by saying that when he went back, he then moved forward along a totally different timeline, which I think is interesting. But that the way he could then change that timeline, he would simply jump back to before where the timeline would happen, and then move forward on the timeline where he was through. The Titor material was fascinating. I think make a great movie. Again, the future predictions that he was making, none of them came true. I mean, none of them came true. And but it's a fascinating story, and it is plausible from the aspect of the computer systems that we have today, based on Microsoft DOS technology, could quite possibly completely just stop working by the year 2034, which is what he's talking about. So, but no, again, the Ted Humphrey Sands of Time stuff doesn't have anything to do John Titor or anything that he concludes.
Okay. I know you've been here a while, so I'm just going to take
Go ahead.
One more question here. Someone wants me to ask you about hybrid children adopted in the U.S. in the late 60s.
Okay. Wow. The greatest, I think, UFO case that I had that I would think, if you go two ends of the spectrum of the worst case, the best case. Worst case would be probably somebody like Whitley Strieber, as an example. Whitley Strieber has no physical evidence, no proof, goes off to write goes to a UFO contactee class, gets all the stories from all the people, and makes millions of dollars and movie stuff and all that, writing best-selling books after he's got everybody else's stories. Best case scenario was a woman by the name of Alice Haggerty. And Alice and I became friends for a long time, and I met her back in 1990, and we've remained friends all this time. Alice was abducted and used as a breeder, actually, by the ETs on the ships. Now, when we first interviewed Alice, she had probes in her head that we had MRIs of, and she could actually open her mouth, and we put the camera up in her mouth, and you could see from the roof of her mouth, you could actually see the ends of the probes, the antennas of the probes, that they actually popped in up her nose. And these doctors who said, we don't know how they got in there, and we can only take them out with, like, cutting her head open with a laser. So she'd had her husband, a lot of other people who had actually witnessed her being abducted that had also been abducted themselves. So let me just give the brief sagacity of this particular case. She had diphtheria when she was 6 years old. She was taken on board a craft. She was put in a glass tube and bathed in a blue light, which then cured her diphtheria. And at that time, they started taking genetic material from her. Now, the worker guys, the captain of the ship, she said, was a 6'6" tall Mayan Indian, and that he was wearing sort of a black cassock with a pillbox sort of hat with a sash. But he said he looked like the Indian on the nickel. And that this was the reason she knew he was Mayan is because he had been pulled out of time by these ETs because he understood the nature of time and the universe to sort of run this operation on her. So she was being taken, and eggs were being taken from her. She was like ovulating like twice a month. They were taking all these eggs, and they were then crossbreeding their DNA with her DNA. Now, there's all these fascinating stories that came from this. For example, she was shown whole rooms of incubators that actually had half-breed children that were in different states of some very, very alien on the one side, some more human on the other side. They would take these babies, not tell her which ones were hers, and she said the creatures, the ETs, were very proud of this, even though they weren't emotional at all. But they would then hand her baby after baby after baby, and she would sort of, coo and sort of pet the child and give it some love, and they would somehow record that motherly vibration to then play at another time. She was then...
Okay, you do know that there are many abductees that have a similar story to this, right?
Well, she was the first one back in 1990, and I'm just saying...
Okay. I just want you to know, I just wanted to say that I've heard this story from many, many books. Dolores Cannon interviewed people that had these kinds of things going on. And this was not just done to one woman, is the point I'm making here. Not to invalidate what you're saying. I'm saying it was done to many women.
Okay. So she was taken up on board up on board the ship, and she was shown on the view screen the various apocalyptic scenarios on the Earth with destruction and all this stuff, saying that this is why that they're breeding these children because of these, this happening. And just her story about these kids. She also said that the more human the children were, that they could not survive without human affection, that they could not survive without human love and contact. And the big question was that the children that were being bred couldn't exactly live on their world and couldn't exactly live on ours. So they're sort of like these mall kids that can only live on the spacecraft, which is something that really didn't make any sense to me. I think it's interesting that you have somebody like David Jacobs, again, who is just a hypnotist who hypnotized a bunch of people, made a bunch of money off the people that he was hypnotizing, and now he did a whole abduction book back in the day, and now he's doing he's making money saying that the women that were abducted and interbreeded with the extraterrestrials, now they're all grown up and they're being introduced into our society and civilization. And is this just sort of a secret ET immigration scenario where now they're all here on Earth to change the world? I never knew what the agenda was. She never knew what the agenda was.
Well,
she was in a car accident.
Well, I mean,
busted her neck, and then the abduction stopped after that. So.
Well, okay. But actually, the agenda is were gray human hybrid children. It's a massive experiment that had to do with the grays, and it was very successful. And indeed, the children are living around the planet now and have human parents. Now, whether there were intermediate types of children that were born that actually were taken off planet and populated other planets, et cetera, grew up on spaceships, as you say, all of, like other levels, different levels of not just half gray, half human, but different mixtures, so to speak. I mean, the grays are notorious for having created an abduction experiment. I mean, that's worldwide.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah.
I've been there. I talked to him. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, okay. So that's valid. I mean, totally valid what your person was saying, but there are many people actually. I myself have had dreams to this effect as well.
Well, it's always a joy to be validated by you, Kerry. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now my existence can continue. So.
Well, I'm happy to hear it, Sean. Okay. So it looks like that's it. I'm thinking there's that was, I think, the last question. Hold on one second here.
All right. Well, tell everybody out there. Thank you very much. And,
yeah. I mean, I think you've answered most of them.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you very much for being on the show. And do you want to give any links when your radio show is, that sort of thing?
Sure. It's well, actually, you can get the books, strangeuniverseradio.com, www.strangeuniverseradio.com. Of course, they are on Amazon. We just put them up. We just got a shipment of books in because every time we get them, they sell out. So it's Amazon.com. It's revolutionradio.co. We couldn't afford to buy the M, obviously. So it's revolutionradio.co, which is also Freedom Slips, or Freedom's Lips, depending on if you want to get yourself kissed up. Freedomslips.com or freedomslips.com. And it's Monday through Friday from 3 to 5 Pacific. We are the #1 radio show on non-terrestrial radio, so that's a pretty big deal. So it's out of 10,000 iPod stations out there, whatever, on the internet. I think we're ranked number 11, and everything above us is all music. So there you go. It's a very popular show. We've got about 2.5 million people who listen every day, and it's good fun. So Monday through Friday, Strange Universe Radio. It's all this information with style and a smile, and we'd appreciate it if you would join us and become part of the whole Strange Universe family. So and thank you, Kerry, for all that you're doing and putting all this together. And
sure.
God bless you, my love, and Merry Christmas. Are you around for Christmas? What's the deal?
Yeah, I'm going to England.
Oh, you're going to England for Christmas?
Yes.
Okay. To see Mr. Neil. Are you seeing Neil?
Yes. So, okay, everyone, have a great holiday. Actually, I'm doing Robert Morningstar tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And same time, same place. So, and then on Friday, we're doing Hugh Newman and Jim Vieira, and we're talking about the giants of America, the giant skeletons that they've found. So, some interesting stuff coming up as well. Thank you so much, Sean. Can't wait to read your book. Mark Richards wants a copy, just letting you know. And so please stay in touch and have a great holiday.
Bye. I love you. Bye-bye. This alternative reality that they've created with all of this hyper advanced technology that's just on the other side of a beaded curtain, that if we could just step through that curtain, there were so many amazing advancements for mankind, and technology would be released. But I think it just has to do with fear of losing control of the population, and fear of losing control of certain economic choke points and controls. But it's been very interesting to see the panic in the kind of Illuminati guys, these fellows behind the scenes, as people have used information like this program and others to start breaking out of the box.
Okay, Sean, just to back up a little, because some people won't know about books 1 and 2.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is also have you talk a little bit more about the author, because are you saying his name is Ted Humphries?
Yeah, it's Dr. Ted Humphries. That's the name that I use in the book for him. But no, it's not
okay, because yeah, you're using the name as if that's his name. Okay, so I just, for people that may not be up to speed with everything, I want to talk about what your relationship was with this Dr. Ted Humphries, which is the name you gave him in the book, which is obviously not his real name. And you're saying he didn't die, because I thought that he did die. That was my understanding when you first came forward with this.
I don't know if he did. That's the challenge. When you're suddenly told, I kept saying, was there a funeral? Did he die? Is it? That's very shame. And they just said, well, he's moved on. And I said, I don't understand what that means. But then when I actually began to read the manuscripts and I started to get a handle on these diaries, these journals, I began to realize that they were playing with the nature of time. That all of this had to do with how you move through and or possibly maybe alter the time stream, which is not as easy as people think. One of the big reasons why they were studying the ships they had 9 craft at Area 50, Colorado border, 1990, did a documentary called UFO Contactees. Traveled all around the world for many months, interviewing everybody, putting together about 600 hours worth of footage with scientists, contactees, abductees, researchers. Then was one of the original producers, which we created on a show that was created by Linda Moulton Howe called Sightings. That actually Sightings, oddly enough, then led to X-Files, which is kind of strange. And then years later, I was one of the original creative producers on a program called Strange Universe Tonight on United Paramount Network, and that ran for 3 years or so there. And then I worked for Hard Copy as a investigative journalist and reporter there, doing a number of different stories which made air on Paramount. Did a lot of research and consulting on unsolved mysteries. Worked for Geraldo on a program called Now Can Be Told. Teamed up with Bob Keviott, actually when we were at Unsolved Mysteries, because I turned Bob Keviott onto the alien autopsy footage, and which later then led to the alien interview footage. And so all the stuff leading up to the books that we're going to talk about tonight, I made a contact in 1992 with a man who I didn't really realize who he was, but he started coming to a couple of the expos that I was speaking at, and we began a long-time friendship, talking to him on the phone very, very often. And at the same time, when I was a guest on the Art Bell radio program on Coast to Coast AM, this was back when we had like 26.4 million listeners, and I was the #1 guest for about 17 years or so. This gentleman would actually call and feed me a lot of information about the secret space program and the extraterrestrial agenda and things that he believed were going on, which then led to a kind of mysterious thing happening. The last time I heard from him, he was actually on the platform at the Obama inauguration. And some months later, I got a call from some very scary attorneys in Century City, who then left me as part of this man. We'll call him Ted Humphrey. That's not his real name. Even if I told you his real name, you wouldn't know it anyway. And it's one of those people that was kind of removed from.
Hey there, Sean.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So we're going live right this minute.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. This is Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm going to be talking to Sean David Morton this evening. And Sean and I go back quite a ways. And we're going to be talking about his upcoming book, Sands of Time, the third book in the series. And let me just get you on the screen here, Sean. Okay, so there we go. All right, so at this moment, Sean, what I want to do is, obviously you have a well-known radio show on Revolution Radio, and you've been broadcasting there for a while. Let's talk about your background briefly, because most people know who you are, but just for those that don't. And right now we're broadcasting over live stream. And once we're done with the interview, it will be put onto YouTube. And so, there could be we have new people signing up all the time to my YouTube channel. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and give them an introduction for yourself. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Sean David Morton, History and Society and all that. But it turned out that he had, quote, moved on. That's all they would say, that he moved on. Not died, but moved on. And then they left me these books and these journals. And they said, you can do with these what you like. You just need to change a few of the names because of he still has a Russian wife that's alive and a couple of children. And so this is what became the best-selling 5-star rated series on Amazon called Sands of Time, book 1 and 2. Uh-oh.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Okay. All right, I just lost you. So it's so Sands of Time, Volume 1 and Volume 2 are out there, and they are a true story, a journal of a man in black, if you will, a man who rose to become one of the most powerful men on the planet with an organization that they called the Group. And the books take place from about 1955 until about 2006 or so, and they include conflicts with the all about the Dulce War, all about why the saucers were actually shipped into Area 51. Hello, okay, there we go. And now we're up to Book 3. Book 3 takes place between about 2004 and about 2006 or so, with most of this having to do with what they believe to be an invasion of the planet, with protecting the Earth from what they think is a massive extraterrestrial invasion that's coming in the early 2020s, between about 2021 and 2025. Strangely enough, I think, Kerry, I wasn't sure who it was. I'm not sure if it was. I saw an interview with a lady that you did, with a lady that you did, the Halls of not Linda Hayes.
You're talking about Anna Hayes, who is now called Ashiana Dean or
Eisha. Something else now, but yes, I saw an interview that you did with her that actually very much confirmed things that were in the book about this this race that's kind of on its way here. But anyway, so I just became kind of an expert, kind of immersed in the secret government, and PhD in clinical psychology, therapeutic counseling, etc., etc. Graduated from USC, University of Southern California, with degrees in Bachelor of Fine Arts, BFA, and political science, with you could call them minors, but semesters away from degrees in organic chemistry and astronomy. Graduated from USC. Grew up around astronauts. My dad was vice president of TRW for customer communications, so I grew up around the Apollo and Gemini and Mercury astronauts when I was younger. Graduated from USC, was involved in the video business, was in did rock music videos, etc., through the 80s. DJ'd in nightclubs, owned nightclubs in a big nightclub in Southern California called Vertigo. Was one of the owners of that. For years I was in film and entertainment. And 1990, I really got involved in the sort of alternative UFO phenomenon. Although, I was involved in it from when I was a kid, because the astronauts would literally come back from space and say things like, Gus Grissom was probably the most vocal of this, saying that they were just spam in a can, and that they were the front for a secret space program that was in the process of going on, that the military was spending 10 times as much as NASA was, and that while the things were going on at Cape Canaveral, that The real space program was going on at other places like Area 51 as an example. And so the background of all of this is that in 1990 we did it. Well, actually in 1989 we were doing investigations in the Dulce Archuleta Mesa in northern New Mexico, which is a top secret underground military facility that it turned out that we were also operating with a group of rather nasty extraterrestrials. But they were also doing genetic research as well. And a lot of things were going on that keyed on Dulce and a number of battles that actually two main battles that actually happened at the Dulce Mesa, which is in northern New Mexico, just south of the